there seems to be place in a person's heart for more than one feeling, to such a degree that the halacha even says that if a person's relative passed away and they also at the same time inherited an inheritance from that relative who passed away, so they would make two brachos. They would make a bracha acknowledging their grief, and they would make a bracha to acknowledge the good tidings of the inheritance. And that could go to even great extremes, Rahman al-Islan, and vice versa, that could go to great extremes. So a person is able to have more than one feeling in their heart. However, there's a difference between feelings and the direction that a person uses their feelings to go towards. So if you want to think of it as emotions are fuel. Emotions are fuel. That means that with an emotion, we can do more of what it is that we're inclined to do. Now, the emotion itself does not determine its direction. If you want to think of an emotion, it's something like a bit of a loose cannon. It's very powerful, but it doesn't have a specific direction. It's a power source, an energy, a power source. And so feelings arise, and we are able to modulate them to a certain degree. If we have some maturity, we can modulate the feelings, which means that if there's a feeling that we want to have, then by dwelling on that feeling, let's say I have a feeling of gratitude. So by dwelling on the ways in which I was a beneficiary, I can increase or intensify the feeling of gratitude. I can also decrease the intensity of a feeling, where I might be able to put something into perspective. And so something that maybe was a big deal initially is now somewhat less of an issue because I'm able to put it into perspective. So feelings are fuel. We can adjust feelings upwards or downward, but what they are fuel and they are energy for a direction. A feeling is a fuel to go in a particular direction. And here's where the action is. The action is, how do we use feelings to go where we're meant to go? And the reason why this is so important is because unconsciously, we are sending a signal to the feeling to go this way or that way. So if a person wants to be or allows themselves to be irritated, then the feeling of irritation that arises is fuel in that direction. And so recognizing that we're dealing with fuel and recognizing that we're dealing with direction, we also have to recognize that we're dealing with our conscious minds, and we're also dealing with things that are not so conscious. So I may not have known that I was inclined to being angry, but lo and behold, I let this feeling fuel anger. And here is where the core spot of a person's avoda rests. And that is, what direction do I want to head in? And what direction does my subconscious want to head in? So for some people, They just don't think about it. But you get into trouble by not thinking about these things. The Navi complains about Ami Lohis Bonam. If you didn't stop and think, you get into trouble. And the thought is, which direction do I want to head? So the Ramchal tells us in Derech Hashem that there's one reason why we exist. Just one. And that is Dveikus Bashem. And that Dveikus can come in the form of being in awe of Hashem, being grateful to Hashem, learning His Torah, doing His mitzvos, emulating Hashem by doing chesed. Those are all ways that we become more davek in Hashem, davening to Hashem, requesting our needs from Hashem, etc. So that's the only direction that leads us to where it is that we're supposed to go, both in this world and eternally. And it is the only direction that aligns with the reason why we're alive, why we were created. We were created for dveikus that would then carry us into eternity. So I just said that pretty matter of fact. As a matter of fact, I could have just read it from the Ramchal and said it very matter of fact. But in saying it, I have to recognize the parts of myself that would like to go in a different direction, that wants to have a good time in this world, that wants to have an easy life, that wants to have a trouble-free existence, that wants to have luxury. The parts of me that are going in a different direction. And I don't want to get into the story about the Yetzer Tov and the Yetzer Hara, because right now what we need to recognize is that there is competition going on within me. So that not only can we hold two emotions at one time, which we see clearly from the halacha that a person is capable of containing and bearing more than one emotion, and maybe sometimes even contradictory emotions. But we also have parts of ourselves that are running in opposite directions, such that at a moment of transcendence, when things become clear, maybe on Yontif or Yomim Noraim, and we pause and consider, then more of ourself is aligned with the right direction. And there is a right direction. The right direction is Dveikus B'Hashem. Not like everybody needs to figure it out for themselves. The right direction is Dveikus B'Hashem. The particular application of that, of course, the person has to assess themselves at any given moment. But there is a right direction. And there's a wrong direction which competes, and it dilutes, and it causes us not to be as firmly attached to the direction that we're meant to go in. And that is where our ability to choose is really in motion. That means I recognize two pulls. The higher part of me, if you want to call it that, the higher part of me knows exactly why I'm here and what direction I should be going in. And then we'll call it a lower part that wants to go in the direction of curling up like a puppy and just ignoring the world and ignoring responsibility, or having an easy life, or being angry, or whatever the case may be. And that part is pulling in a different direction. Now, fuel is being injected because we're having feelings throughout our day, sometimes very strong feelings. So we're having feelings throughout our day, and the fuel is being injected into the system, and it is either being used by the part of us that sees it for what it is, an opportunity to request of Hashem, to transcend our pettiness, to align with eternity and align with Vekus Hashem. So a part of us gets some of that energy, but there is a competition for that same energy. And that's where the choice is, how are we going to funnel or channel the energy that a feeling brings up? So a feeling is bringing up energy. It's creating energy. You're fueling it. Chazal say that Avram Avinu didn't even want to give a bracha to Yitzchak because he saw that both Esav and Yaakov would come from Yitzchak. So if you give a bracha, so then everything flourishes. And he didn't want that. He saw that the same bracha could be used to propel Yaakov to his greatness, but it could also be used by Esav, could be hijacked. And so he actually backed off. He didn't give the bracha the way we might have expected, and he said, let Hashem do it. And there's a mashal of a snake that was around a certain plant. He didn't want to fertilize it. He didn't want to water it. He didn't want to do anything. Let the owner of the garden choose how he wants to handle this. And so that's what we would imagine, that if we could say, well, let's just squash the emotions, because I don't want the emotions to be fueling the competing force. I don't want the emotions to be fueling the direction away from Hashem, except that then you don't have the emotions available to be able to go in the right direction. And so here is where a person has the opportunity to take advantage of something that we've been talking about, that Hashem gets involved in our hearts. And so what emerges here is a perhaps a surprising request, where we're asking Hashem to help us, or maybe even to intervene, so that our feelings will propel us in the right direction. Feelings could fuel the right direction, and it can fuel the wrong direction. Well, the feeling there is a feeling, and I may not have the clarity, or maybe only part of me has the clarity to want that feeling to fuel me in the right direction. So, to the extent that there's moments of clarity on Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, perhaps when there's moments of clarity, so then all of the feelings that come up, we can put them in the right direction. But that's not always the case. And on an ongoing basis, there is that competition, and that's where the fact that Hashem gets involved in our hearts becomes crucial. That we turn to Hashem and we recognize that feelings are fuel, and they can fuel in both directions. And I can almost feel them. I can almost feel the feeling arising and pulling me in two directions. Well, they're not really pulling me in two directions. The feeling itself is just fuel. It's not pulling. But the parts of me that are trying to grab that feeling are pulling in opposite directions. And so the same way that a person can contain two opposite feelings, he can contain this competition. But for that, he needs to do what Avraham did. Avraham said, let Hashem handle this. I can't. There's two different directions here. There's two different pulls. There's Yaakov and Esau. There's two different pulls. And let Hashem. And so by turning to Hashem to give that emotion its pull, its push, is a vital part of our avoda. And by the way, it shouldn't surprise us You shouldn't therefore just let loose with unnecessary emotions. Don't jump off a bridge with a bungee rope around your foot, because you're going to have an intense emotion. And who said that you're going to be able to, that emotion, that tremendous amount of fuel, who said that that's going to pull you in the right direction? Who said that that's going to push and pull in the right direction? Do you know what you're going to do with that emotion with such confidence that you can just let the emotion arise and you know that it'll take you in the right direction? Who told you? So to be frivolous with letting emotions bubble up or increase those emotions, or just let emotions rip, that certainly is not a useful model. But all I wanted to point out is that we have a secret weapon, and that is that Hashem is prepared to help us use the fuel to go in the direction that we're meant to go. And so a part of our preparation for Pesach, hopefully we'll have opportunities to reinforce this, part of our preparation is recognizing that this process of Hashem pushing the emotions in the right direction is really Geula. That's what it means to be redeemed. What it means to be redeemed is to have all of the emotions, through Hashem's help, all of the emotions channeled in the right direction, so that there's no longer the competition, and we are then redeemed. We can then be confident that all of the emotions will allow us to go in the right direction.